You're listening to the Global Ed Podcast, where educators share inspiring and thought-provoking stories from around the world.
In this episode, I'll be speaking with Rachel, a principal of a remote indigenous school found in far north Australia. Welcome, Rachel. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Gavin.
Tell me a little bit about yourself, Rachel, and how you got involved in Indigenous education.
I'm Rachel. I was born and raised in the Philippines, and I grew up in a city called Cagayan de Oro. I've got my husband here with me, and he's actually my first link to Indigenous education. He's a professional photographer, and he was involved in a big Indigenous festival for about 4 years as a photographer. That's before we met. But when we met then, just him sharing his images of community from that festival really captivated me.
So how did you get from that to actually being the principal of a school?
So I was a first-year teacher in just a normal, average Melbourne school, non-Indigenous students. The principal asked me, "What's the dream, Rachel?" And I said, well, to one day run a school for the underprivileged. And the principal actually shared a newsletter from this Indigenous school I am currently now at. And I just remember being captivated by the images, and I immediately jumped onto their website and saw this beautiful children and beautiful elders in the community, read their history, read their stories, and immediately thought, oh, I'd love to be part of that school one day. But with a really small teaching team, I thought that would be near impossible to actually get a job there.
Well, obviously you impressed them because you did get a job there. But what was it that started you on the journey to apply for that role?
There's a conference I attended in 2015, and a few teachers from the Northern Territory shared about their work. And there's one particular speaker I remember. She said something like, "We don't have cafes or big shops, but we have time and space for things that matter." And that really just stuck to me. And so I went home, asked my husband if we could move to the Northern Territory, and he said no. So just the general Northern Territory wasn't enough to convince him. But one day I saw an ad for a principal at our current school, and just purely joking, I showed him the ad, and he said, "You should go for it." And yeah, he just encouraged me. It was Gawa specifically that drew him, and obviously me as well. And yeah, that's the start of our story. We talked to, at this stage, I was only 4 years into my teaching career in Melbourne. So I was young, a new team leader. I didn't want to be in over my head. So we talked to people who knew us professionally and personally to get their wisdom. But everyone was very encouraging. And eventually I decided to just put an application in, knowing that if it's for me, the door will open. If not, we will move on.
So what was the process of getting hired?
Because it is an Indigenous community, it's also a community-controlled school. A vital step in the recruitment process is a visit. So everyone, all the elders, all the community members have to have a say. So what that meant was a 4-hour flight from Melbourne to Darwin, and then from Darwin, hopping onto a 30-seat plane onto Elcho Island. There were 2 stops to 2 different communities prior. And then when we reached Elcho Island, we hopped onto a 7-seater plane to reach the other end of Elcho Island. And they obviously said yes. And we were really, really hopeful, and just hoped and prayed that we would do all the right things, whether we're conscious of it or not, because we just, as soon as we got here, we really just wanted to be part of the family. So Gawa is all on sand, so it's the tip of the northernmost tip of Elcho Island, which is an island that's only 55 kilometers long and 6 kilometers wide. So when you're standing any spot really in Gawa, you'll see the ocean from anywhere. There's mangroves for good hunting to the right. There's a creek for good fishing. Our front yard is the ocean. Well, first the sand dunes, then the ocean. And lots of rocks there have oysters. So everyone is hunting when the tide's right. And we can also see a couple of islands from where we're at, the further islands, part of the Wessel group of islands.
What were your first impressions of the people and the community?
I remember there's a lot of quiet. So, that the concept of time and space that drew me in. As soon as I got to Gawa, I really felt those two things, time and space. In Gawa, there's only 10 houses. 5 of those is staff housing, and a few school buildings. And everywhere you stand, you can see the ocean and then the bush behind you. So there's that time and space. And so sitting with the elders first, it just felt very relaxed. They have a way of not demanding anything and just letting things be. So we just sat together, our elders and their pet pig and my husband. And there was a toddler there as well. And it was just being together more than any conversation. I just remember just sitting and listening and no rush into conversation or anything like that.
I know that in indigenous culture that family and relationships are really important. How did that play out for you when you joined the community?
Yes, so Cameron and I got adopted during our first visit, and that was even before we knew I had the job. So I wasn't sure what to do. I definitely remember thanking my sister who adopted me, but it was only in actually moving here that we realized what that meant. Last year, we asked our students what reconciliation means, and every student mentioned, or actually the question was, how can indigenous and non-indigenous people reconcile with each other? How can they be friends? And without fail, each student would talk about adoption. So this is something that Yolŋu do with non-indigenous people who come and join their community. And what that looks like, so my sister who adopted me, everyone who is her wako or child is now my child. Everyone who is her mari or grandmother is now my mari. And that's not just in titles, it's in actual relationships as well. So I've never been able to meet any of my grandparents, being the youngest of 11 kids. They had passed on before then. So it was so special just to have my family expand infinitely ever since joining here.
That's great. When you're speaking to your family in Elcho Island, do you speak to them in English or do you now speak to them in their native language?
Yes. So being part of this big family actually means you have so many teachers into the language and culture of Elcho Island. So Gawa belongs to the Waramiri clan. Waramiri is also the language of the land. But it's actually our main elder who speaks it. Everyone else, Waramiri is also a critically endangered language. However, most people actually speak a different local language called Jambar Puingo. And that's the first language that we tried to learn upon arriving here, just because everyone speaks it. We've been here 7 years, and I love that there's no end to learning. Sometimes I'm frustrated at the mistakes I still make and the phrases I still don't catch in conversations. But mostly it's actually a really fun process, language learning. Once I was telling old man a story of our music teacher getting injured at a football game in town. It was quite dramatic, and I shared how the teacher had blood flowing from his head after a tackle. And then our elder started laughing. I'm like, that's not very sympathetic. But that was the day. That was the day I learned the difference between two words, gulang and gula. Gulang means blood, and gula means poo. I had said that poo was flowing out of our music teacher's
Nice.
head. So, of course, our elder was in stitches.
That's cool. So what have you learnt from moving to Elcho Island?
I've learned what real community looks like. Our old man used to say that there's no secrets in Gawa. And that's so true. We know people's brokenness, they know ours. And just community means knowing deeply people's struggles, joys, and failings, and choosing to love and embrace them anyway. So I have learned what real community means, what it looks like, what it feels like.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome. Now, you moved up there to be the principal of the school. Was there a particular quality or approach which you took to help become part of that community?
I think humility, not that I had to put that on or anything. I don't know. I can't remember now if someone actually sat me down and talked to me about it. But I've always thought that actually being young was an advantage. At first, you'd think a young principal is a bad idea, but I actually think coming in young, they saw me as someone teachable and humble and just keen to listen. And I was so keen for and I still am keen for any advice, wisdom from my elders and community members. So that was my approach. Just be honest in that I don't know everything. I don't know a lot even. And I'm just here to listen, work together, and get our dreams to come true together for the children in the community especially.
I want to talk about the school now, and I'm really interested to understand how teaching and learning happens up there. So is the approach different up in your context?
Part of the school vision in being in a homeland is that that realization that being in the right place with the right people is essential to learning. But as much as part of our vision is preserving traditional knowledges and skills, our elders, the parents, the families value Western knowledge as well. They want their children to be able to navigate the Western world. So we do teach reading, writing, numeracy, as you would also see in classrooms around Australia. We might have different stimulus materials, such as, we've gone yidaki making, didgeridoo making. So let's bring that into the classroom. Let's write about that. Let's talk about that. But reading is still one of those things that bring us joy. Seeing our students just read for the first time has been one of the greatest joys. And this could be, the first time readers could be 11, 12, 13-year-olds who've missed school for most of their life. And then all of a sudden they're reading, and they're reading everything. They're reading the backs of water bottles. They're reading backs of pencils. So we make sure to have a balance between traditional knowledge and Western knowledge.
Do you find that your students respond well to that? Do they engage in their lessons? Do they attend school? Are they enjoying what they're learning about?
First, I actually want to talk about the narrative on Indigenous education in general, in that it's quite negative, the current narrative. And, there is some reality such as low attendance. But this talk of disengagement, I feel like for those students who are here, and families as well, they are so engaged in the aspects of their lives that they lead. So yes, like many schools, we suffer from attendance problems. But when our elders, our students are able to do the things that they love, they absolutely are engaged. And to me, it's no surprise that my Yolŋu family's culture is amongst the longest living continuous culture because of how they do teaching and learning. On a school trip to Darwin once, we drove past the parliament. A student asked me what that place is for, and I said, that's where they discuss and make laws. And my student clarifies by hitting his pointer fingers against each other as if hitting clapsticks. Because in Yolŋu way, Yolŋu law is taught and learnt with clapsticks, the didgeridoo, elders singing and people dancing. Learning is embodied, accompanied by music and song, so making it all very memorable. And they don't just do a ceremony once a term and that's it. There's multiple opportunities, multiple exposures, and our students are learning from when they're out of the womb, really.
Is there a particular type of teaching or way of teaching that the students respond well to?
When they're learning dances or ceremonial singing, it's not a lesson that an elder takes you through step by step, but it's really just watch and copy. Didgeridoo making is also an example of this watch and learn approach, or as one of our founding elders for the school says, it's Malton, Nama, Ngama, Jama, Maram, which is follow, watch, hear or listen, then work or copy, and then that's how you take a lesson. And that's exactly how I saw didgeridoo making happen. The young men literally followed an elder around as he tapped tree barks, listening for the hollow sound. They watched his every move and listened. After seeing this elder find the right bark, he cut it down with an axe, then used a handsaw to cut it to a didgeridoo size. Then he smashed the bark with the back of an axe to soften it enough so it peels off. And then our young men were off finding their own didgeridoo straight after, not missing a beat of the lesson. And mind you, the elder probably only spoke 5 sentences in that whole lesson.
I've heard that in some Indigenous schools, hunting is part of the program. Do you do that at your school? And what's your approach to it?
Hunting requires first your Yolŋu adults who know and have been trained on what to look for. So again, context of family. Our teaching teams, it's never just one teacher. It's at least one non-Indigenous teacher with one Indigenous teacher. So when we go hunting, there's always a responsible Yolŋu adult alongside another teacher, and just requires a lot of walking, bringing a lot of water with you, and going through lots of branches, walking through pretty much what you'd think isn't walkable until you find a good hunting spot, and then you have to have really good eyes to find the mud mussels or crabs, whatever it is you're hunting for. I remember my husband just laughing when he was asking, how do you look for crabs? Like, teach me how to hunt for crabs. And our students' advice to my husband was he just needs to look for the eyes. It's like, this is literally the smallest part of the crab that you can, that you're asking me to locate. But that's how they find the crabs, the moving eyes.
Brilliant. Could you share with me a success story, something that stands out in your memory as just something which is great?
I remember a particular student who has some learning needs. He got teased a bit because of some of the difficulties he had. And I remember being quite concerned when he was about to move from primary to secondary. I just didn't know how he would go. But it was at the same time, as I was mulling these things in my head, we were very blessed to have a music teacher come. He's actually not a trained music teacher, but a professional musician who initially came just for 5 weeks to do a music program. And that just ended up being what this student needed. So this student, unbeknownst to us, was just a wonderful singer. and musician. And our very first concert, everyone else who had practiced was too shy to perform. And this student was the one who stood up and sang his song and brought the house down. And from then on, the love, acceptance, respect for him was so high. I had no problems transitioning him into secondary. He found a good peer group who also were musicians, and they started a band together. So I think that's one of the biggest highlights.
And what would you say is the most rewarding part of the job?
I love just being part of the family, and that looks like hearing people call out to me in terms of in kinship terms. So calling me mom or potential mother-in-law or grandmother. And that might seem like a strange thing to feel rewarded by, but it actually just shows that you are part of people's lives and your influence goes beyond the walls of the school. So I find that very rewarding.
You just mentioned going beyond the walls of the school. Now, you're the principal of the community, you live in the community, and it's a small community. Does that mean that people are always around your house? You never get any time away? You've always got people wanting to see you?
Gavin, yes, that is our everyday life. And you have reminded me of, we've got a YouTube channel called Homeland Dreaming. And there's one particular episode called Never Home Alone. And it just shows a constant stream of not just children, but the adults coming in and out of our home. And I love that. I love having people in and out. I love feeding people. I love cooking with children and adults. So yeah, you're never home alone, never lonely. And always lots to laugh about and giggle about, especially with the young ones.
If there's anybody who was thinking about getting into Indigenous education in a remote community, what would be some of the qualities that you believe they should possess to be successful, not just for themselves, but also for the community?
Flexibility, humility, and just an eagerness to listen and learn. I remember our elders saying, it's not about how much you know, but how much you are willing to learn.
Today truly is an historic occasion.
Australia has taken measures to close the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in a 10-year strategy signed by federal and state governments. The aim is to improve life outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, after efforts over the past decade did little to budge their shorter life expectancy and worse health prospects.
For me, the most heartbreaking part of living and working in Gawa is the health crisis. And I think it's hard for many people to understand. Many deaths are due to preventable chronic diseases. One fortnight this year, we had 4 deaths of close family. In the last month, we literally have had 5 funerals in town. Funerals can be 1 to 3 weeks long. And as these funerals were happening, 2 more deaths were announced. This should not be normal. You know how kids play house? Kids here do that too, but sometimes they also play funerals, acting out how funerals play out. That's how normal it is for them.
Obviously, the health crisis has a big impact on the community and the school. In what other ways does it impact the life of the students?
One of the highlights of my early career as principal here was seeing the establishment of our school council. It was made up of 6 elders. But soon after, 1 month after that establishment, 1 elder passed away and 2 more elders passed away 2 years later. Yeah, and people might think elder are really elderly people, but no, these are women in their 50s. So those council members, my mentors, are irreplaceable. So even now we have that gap in our school council and in our lives. And, death is traumatic. Multiple deaths is trauma multiplied. But learning about trauma, especially for children, trauma's impact is heightened if there's an absence of a stable, supportive adult. So it astounds me how Yolŋu are able to withstand this constant heartbreak. But one key is that you never grieve alone. Kinship relations mean there's roles already built in on who takes care of the funeral, who carries and looks after the body, how ceremonies are done. And like all teaching and learning, grief is also embodied. You can dance to show honor in grief. For women, you can wail. And it's all teaching and learning done in the context of family.
Obviously, this has a deep impact on the community. And as the principal and a community leader, how do you cope with it? How do you be a leader in that situation?
For me, I let myself grieve, which means I wail and cry with the women. When it's the right time, I dance in the ceremonies to show respect, as all our staff and students do as well. And I also uphold part of the vision that our elders set for our school, and that's Ririmireu, which is they want a place without sickness. So we do that by so last year, in one of our semesters, our focus was on this particular aspect of the school's vision, Ririmireu, without sickness. So just education on healthy choices, healthy eating, exercise, etc. Homelands in itself are also known to just produce healthier lifestyle choices by virtue of having all the hunting spots right at your fingertips.
Talking about healthier lifestyle choices, how do you look after yourself? How do you make sure that your well-being is okay?
Good question. Well, I spend a lot of time with my Yolŋu family. That helps me. And I feel that length of time my Yolŋu family allows for grieving in terms of, a week-long funeral, the preparations towards that. It's that time and space again that just allows you to process things healthily. I write poetry. I talk to my husband. I have many quiet sit-downs on the beach, just looking out into the vast expanse, knowing, that it's going to be okay as the sun keeps rising and setting each day. But definitely a real thing. One of my poems I wrote goes, how many heartaches does it take to break a heart? How many tears to tear someone apart? It's just a real thing, and you just have to keep going through grief together. I'm talking about it honestly, vulnerably, but also being reminded that there's so much life, so much to be joyful for. And also remembering, the loved ones who've passed, the joy and life that they shared with us. There's a lot of storytelling, and I think storytelling is healing as well.
Sadly, we're coming close to the end of our time together. But just in closing, could you share with me perhaps the hopes you have for your students, your school, and your community?
Yes, I was contemplating this question, Gavin, and struggling within myself, and you're free to correct me if I'm wrong, but just sharing hopes for people. I don't know, I feel like I'm putting myself above people. I guess does that make sense? Do you get it?
Yeah.
I feel like
I get it.
Our community, the children in our care, they have just a bright future ahead of them already, as is. So I guess, my only humble hope is this health crisis will be solved, or that we will see a real change, a real difference. I hope that our students can have lives where in funerals are not normal. Yeah, I just hope that they live long lives because they're just wonderful, wonderful people.
Rachel, it's been an absolute privilege to speak to you. I wish you all the best and thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Gavin. My pleasure.
Next time on the Global Ed Podcast.
It moves me to make the difference in those children, to draw smiles where there used to be tears. That's what moves me still today. So every time I deliver a workshop as an IB educator, I try to always make teachers believe that no matter how many papers you fill out or planners or meetings you attend, everything should be leading to making those children smile today and forever.
In the next episode, I speak with Isella, who is an IB board member and chair of the IB Heads Council. Isella shares her journey from educational psychologist to principal and how her involvement in the IB changed her life. If you have enjoyed listening to the Global Ed Podcast, please subscribe and follow me, Gavin Kinch, on LinkedIn.